Okay, so today we're going to go through the Little Seagull book, the readings for this week. We'll probably not have enough time for the article for the art of the next essay for this week from the textbook, although it's kind of weird timing. It just is kind of coincidental timing that you guys will be looking at that article when you probably know if you're following the news that the big tech companies are in a lot of trouble for censorship, and in a way, that's kind of what the essay for this week talks about. And as you know, that like Mark Zuckerberg and a few other people from the big tech companies are going to have to come in front of Congress on Friday to basically give their side of the story. So it's kind of weird that it works out this way. But anyways, we'll probably won't get into that until Wednesday, and then Wednesday we'll probably also start another topic after we go through that. I was thinking we'll talk about Malcolm Gladwell, but I might save that for future weeks, but we'll see. But just a reminder that some of the topics for your paper, for your second paper, and also, by the way, too, let me just real quickly go back to the calendar here. If we look at the calendar, remember that, these are the readings for this week, the 19th. So we're gonna cover the Little Seagull today. We probably won't get into the essay from these pages till Wednesday, but if you look at the calendar, there's actually nothing due this week. So the next assignment actually won't even be due until the timed quiz. Now, keep in mind that that's supposed to be an in-class activity. So what will happen on that day is that we'll meet here in class like the same time, and you'll be given a top. It's the same format as the first time quiz. You'll be given an hour and 15 minutes, and I'll give you a topic to write about, but I'll also keep it open the entire day. So if you can take it anytime that day. So that'll be again November 8th. If I had to do it over when I was scheduling this, I probably would have put the essay 2 a little bit earlier, just because you maybe want to have time, a little bit more time between that and the final project. I mean, you still have plenty of time, but keep in mind too that when we talk about these topics, real quick, let's go through the topics. So you could do physical versus digital books, athletes in the kneeling controversy, is football safe, et cetera, et cetera. You can see the list here. I know that Helena, if she's here, I know that she had another topic. That's fine. If you want to do something else, just let me know. I mean, the main thing with this next essay is that you're making an argumentative essay and you have to find at least one source from the library, of course. And I just want to point this out, though, that the second paper, the topic that you choose, could also be the same topic for your final paper. It's just that the format is going to be a little bit different. The structure of it's going to be a little bit different. You have to do a little bit more research, or actually a lot more research. And we'll talk about that as we go through here. And another topic too we talked about is athletes and injuries. Okay, so this is from last time. Let me go ahead. We talked about Sherry Turkle, and I want to highlight some of the things that people wrote for the assignment from yesterday here. But before we do that, just remember to stay up to date with the inquisitive. That's the lab assignments, of course. Remember that it's just a little part of the final grade, just 10%, but that can still be very significant. So just make sure that you're keeping up to date with the inquisitive assignments. And I want to just highlight a few things that people said in their papers. So Selena says that there is also an increase, and she's talking about the Sherry Turkle article that you guys read. She says there's also an increase in anxiety portrayed among young people, or among people simply by conversing. People have become comfortable with the idea of having the internet to find their connection with others. The internet has become the mediator in a relationship. So that's absolutely true. Does everybody agree with that? That sometimes that Selena says that, yeah, people have become comfortable with the idea of having the internet to find their connection with others. That's very much true. And on this note too, I think that the same thing I would say is true with this quote from Selena, with the idea of like graduates, like recent graduates, and when they go on job interviews. So we're going to have a whole class later on resumes and cover letters. And one of the things that a lot of employers will say is that young people, a lot of times, as soon as they graduate, they go on job interviews and they could get good grades. You know, they could have gotten excellent grades and their GPA might be very high. But the problem is that when they come in with face-to-face communication for like a job interview, sometimes they struggle with it. And why? It's because, as Selena says, we've become comfortable with the idea of having the internet to find our connection with others. And we rely so much on technology and texting and other things as well, like social media and so forth, that when it comes to like face-to-face communication, sometimes it's difficult. So we'll talk more about that when we talk about resumes and cover letters. Also, this is kind of an interesting quote from Renee. She says, the reason for some people to prefer texting rather than calling is that they can thoroughly think about what they're going to say before responding. Also, there is no bizarre silence that may occur on the phone while waiting for a response. So when you think about it, and that's very true, because when you think about it, you may have experienced times, I'm sure that everybody's experienced times where they're talking to somebody, whether it's on the phone or face to face, and there could be a silence, and that silence really is indicative of what's happening in that conversation. I mean, if somebody's trying to accuse somebody of something, just that mode of silence, that period of silence can indicate their guilt, or in other examples. That was just one example. But yeah, when we communicate online though, sometimes there is a pause or there's no pause. I mean, well, there is a pause and you can go back to the conversation, and it's different than face to face. Now, also, McKenna brings up an excellent point here and she's talking about when the author discusses the Women's March, she also uses the March on Washington to talk about how the protest took months and months to plan. It was symbol for the civil rights movement. But the Women's March started on Facebook from people reposting information about the march, therefore requiring less time spent on coordination and resources than, say, the March of Washington. So I'm going to show you a video clip here. It's a little bit long. It's probably, I think it's like 20, 25 minutes or so, but it's about what happened in Egypt back in 2011. Now, you guys might not know about this, but there was a revolution in Egypt. Let me just find it here. Give me 1 second. Actually, hold on 1 second here. Okay, right here. Yeah, so in 2011, Egypt had a leader or a dictator named Mubarak. And there was a movement to overthrow them, and they eventually did. But it wasn't just like a revolution that would happen normally in years past. It actually started with social media, in particular Facebook. So you're going to see a little bit of this. Unfortunately, it's not letting me blow up into full screen, but I'll zoom in. So they talk about this really in the first half, I would say, of this documentary, but it is very, very fascinating to see how a lot of, in this case, revolutions can start with social media, or a lot of movements can start with social media. I mean, the same thing is true, not even with government situations, but I mean, even with the Me Too movement in recent years, where somebody would say something and then other people react. Somebody would tweet that, hey, you know what, that also happened to me with this director or this producer, or whoever it may have been. So this just kind of takes a look at the power of social media and how it can be used to galvanize support for certain causes. So, like I said, it's about 25 minutes, so it's a little bit long, but it's pretty interesting. So let me go ahead and play this for you.
Before they filled Liberation Square in Cairo, down a side street, in a small office, they are planning a revolution. They call themselves the April 6th Youth Movement. They have a list of demands and a plan, a national protest, fueled by the internet. Ahmed Mar is their leader.
Ahmed Maher is a civil engineer, almost compulsively quiet, compulsively limelight avoiding young guy, but very tech savvy.
David Woolman from Wired magazine has been reporting inside April 6th movement and watching Mar use the web to spread anti-government messages to eager young Egyptians.
In the real world, these governments are good at suppressing assembly. But short of shutting off the internet, the government really can't prevent the people from communicating and convening in this new and incredibly powerful way.
Mar was plugged into a network of activists determined to expose the repression in the Mubarak regime.
What happened in Egypt in the last few years was that a lot of bloggers were just filming police brutality on mobile phones.
The power of a video of seeing in action someone being beaten and tortured and killed is incredibly powerful. It's something that probably words it can't convey in the same sense.
Egyptians saw something new and shocking. Graphic images of brutal interrogations taken by the security police.
It depicts an Egyptian citizen being tortured and sodomized inside an Egyptian police station. But I personally have published like almost over a dozen of these videos, and only very few of them have been investigated.
The movement was born back in 2008 during the planning for a textile workers' strike on April 6th. Ahmed Mar used Facebook and YouTube to organize a national protest.
The April 6th Facebook page said, "We call on all Egyptians to go on strike." And from then on, their page became incredibly popular.
60% of Egypt's population is under 30. Even with access to university education, many are unemployed. They seemed ready to be radicalized.
These young people in Cairo said, how can we support this? And they launched this group, which, as we know now, swelled to 70, 80,000 people in a matter of weeks. And this caught the regime by surprise.
But on April 6th, 2008, the day of the strike, Egyptian security police struck back. They killed 4 protesters and jailed 400 others. Before long, they had tracked down Ahmed Mar.
كان ضرب كله بايديهم في دماغي ضرب على قفايا وضرب على ظهري كده.
He was beaten by the security forces.
بعد كده كان الاسئله كلها على ناس اعضاء في جروب الفيسبوك.
He says his torturers wanted to know about a virtual friend named Fatima.
ما اعرفهاش فيس تو فيس عضو في الجروب.
They didn't seem to understand that she wasn't a friend in real life.
He was taken in and beaten so that he could give the police the password for the Facebook group when there was no password all along. So that just shows you just how clueless the regime and its security apparatus was.
ولا احنا ممكن نعمل فيك نغتصبك ونجيب عصايه وندخلها وحاجات زي كده.
Mar gave the security police a false password. He was released.
When he is finally released and is back online, you see this feeling of new energy and new anger about the treatment of the people and about the suppression and about the regime. And so this galvanizes the movement. Maher then has more currency because now he's been tortured and he's back at it. And a lot of people I spoke with, they really describe him as the everyman hero.
It took 3 more years. Mar and April 6th slowly built a base. They had begun planning by learning from others.
They would talk about Mandela, they would talk about Serbia, and they were taking notes. And because of the internet, they were reading about these things.
They studied the Serbian student movement, Otpor, meaning resistance. Using highly disciplined, nonviolent tactics, the students had successfully toppled Slobodan Milosevic. Sergej Popovich was the leader of that revolution. He shared his experience with the April 6th group.
One of the key things is to understand that the nonviolent struggle is a form of warfare, because violence contaminates your movement and creates your opponent's excuse for using police and military forces. Also, there is this big problem with media and violence. If you have a march of 100,000 people and one single idiot throwing stone, he's going to be the star of the day.
The Serbian example highlighted the fact that movements don't need to be violent, especially in Mubarak's Egypt. I mean, violence will backfire. The police are incredibly violent.
اولا دربنا صرنا تدربنا على فكره ان احنا ايه هو مفهوم العنف ازاي نقدر
Mohammed Adel had been to Serbia to learn the techniques.
ازاي نقدر نساوي دوت نقدر نتحكم في الناس نقدر ننظم مسيرات وفعاليات كويسه.
An extraordinary act of daring in the country of Tunisia. The President Ben Ali has stepped down.
Then Tunisia broke, and as protesters there overthrew their government, Mar and the April 6th activists saw their chance.
This was their moment, and they saw it happen. And they jumped online, they jumped on SMS, they jumped on Twitter, and they had each other accessible. 30, 40, 50,000 people right away in this forum.
They set a date, a public holiday, January 25th, and issued a call for action.
Asma Mahfouz, a young activist with the April 6th movement, decided to film a vlog to encourage Egyptians to join protests on January the 25th, Police Day.
عايزين ننزل يوم 25 لو لسه عندنا ننزل نطالب بحقنا كبني ادمين كل واحد في البلد دي شايف نفسه راجل يبقى ينزل.
The video went viral. The morning of the 25th, Mar and April 6th waited to see if anyone would show up.
They have no idea if 3 people are going to turn up or 300 or 3,000. They're just doing their best to be heard and to be convincing in cyberspace. And so they really don't know what's going to happen, what will be the turnout.
From the balcony of the April 6th office, they saw it begin. In Egypt, this holiday is called Police Day.
كان يوم 25 احنا بنعمله كل سنه بنعمله كل سنه حاجه ساخره من الشرطه عملنا بيان وزعناه في الشارع ان ده ازاي يحتفلوا بالبلطجيه والحراميه واللي بيساعدوا على التزوير والكلام ده كله ولكن ما حدث في تونس غير المسار بالكامل.
I heard about April 6th from Facebook. I'm not into politics. I just I wanted to do something for my country, something positive. That's the happiest day of my life.
Then the security police. They try the non-violent tactics imported from Serbia. They hold their hands up in compliance. They salute and even hug the police. On this day, it seems to work. They move toward Tahrir Square.
The uprising started with these protests on January the 25th, but then it reached everyone else. It became much bigger than just social media and the invitation on social media. It became something that galvanized all Egyptians.
At April 6th headquarters, producer Elizabeth Jones began capturing the first days of what they were starting to call the revolution. Mar is already coordinating the next big protest.
لو في حاجه ممكن نستمر في ضغوطنا المستمره من اجل ان احنا نحصل تغيير حقيقي مش مجرد وعود زي كل وعود، لازم يحصل تغيير حقيقي. الناس مش تخرج من الشارع غير لما يحصل تغيير حقيقي في مصر.
A lot of it is really about this innovation. Every night they think about, what can we do next? What can we call an event? The tweet that went around the world, or the million-person march, or the Day of Rage. They're innovating. They're creating.
By now, tens of thousands have joined the protests. Clashes have begun with the security police. There have been arrests, including April 6 spokesman Mohammed Aro.
مجرد ان الامن شافني في العربيه نزلني من العربيه ونزل فيا تحت. الامن نازل فيا وبيتحني بالبوكس وبالعصيان. كان في اسماعيل الشهاب مدير امن القاهره نزل فيا ضرب. قال لي خدوه على العربيه. غير كده كمان اضافي الضباط في الشارع كله ظابط يشوفني عملتوا ثوره بقيتوا زي تونس خلي الفيسبوك ينفعكم.
Mar tries to handle organizing for as many as 100,000 Egyptians who could hit the streets the next day.
يوم اتوقع هيبقى اكبر بكتير من يوم ال 25 لان الحشد كبير جدا على الانترنت وعلى الرسائل، وحتى الناس في الشارع بتتكلم بصوره كبيره، وهيبقى خروج من مساجد كتير في القاهره وفي المحافظات، هيبقى العدد كبير يعني في مناطق شعبيه ويتجمعوا برضه عملية تحرير، بس اتوقع ان يكون عدد اكبر بكتير من يوم الثلاث.
In the morning, their plan is to walk from the mosques through the square directly to the presidential palace. At dawn, the police moved into the city. At April 6 headquarters, because of the previous day's violence, they decide to name this march the Day of Rage. Then the government retaliated. Mobile phones and the internet, the key organizational tools, were taken down.
When Mubarak shut off the internet, it really revealed the desperation on the part of the regime about what was happening and about how effectively the protesters were using the tools of social media.
But even without the internet, the organizers continued to work.
They're not just online activists. They have boots on the ground. They have connections to other, experienced activists.
They'd learned from the Serbian students and the Tunisians. Wearing homemade armor, they are prepared for another day in the streets.
I think it's a nice combination of people who know how to use the internet and are web savvy and also have real experience with street protests and trying to organize them.
جمع الناس في مسيرات سلميه هتتجه لميدان التحرير من كذا منطقه، حوالي 4 مناطق بس من المناطق الشعبيه جدا، الطبقه اللي هي فقيره جدا من الناس، عشان هي دي الطبقه اللي حاسه بالمشاكل الاقتصاديه اللي احنا اصبحنا فيها دلوقتي.
Their non-violent tactics are tested immediately.
Demonstrations and the largest ever seen.
The protests began after midday prayers, which happened on Friday.
Violent protests have been spreading. That curfew in place, we've seen
Provoked by deliberate violence from the police.
Air is thick with black smoke and tear gas. A protest movement. They're calling this an open revolt on social networking sites like
Cairo is in lockdown.
They are beating people in the streets.
Prevented by police from getting to Tahrir Square. They're forced up the side roads. The police in hot pursuit. It it becomes a standoff. But more protesters arrive. The police can't guard every access route. Then everything stops for prayers. The police turn their backs, a gesture of respect. But once prayers are over, the pushing and shoving picks back up. And then they break through to Tahrir Square. Cairo seems like a war zone. April 6th headquarters becomes a makeshift clinic.
التحرير من الدين للامن عوده سخنه جدا. قال لك زادوا عن 20,000 كمان.
In the beginning, it is only burned eyes and smoke inhalation.
تجمعات اتنينات كده مع بعض. بس لو احنا رايحين التحرير بقى الناس حضراتكم جهزوا لنا حاجات زي كده. خلي بقى بصوا وشوفوا اللي انتوا عندكم ايه. الدنيا تحت بتطلق حاجات غريبه. مبهدلين الشباب، هم الضرب مباشر في جسم الشباب.
الشعب في السوق ماشيين اطفال صغيرين ما بين 9 لغايه الناس عندهم 50 سنه نازلين يقولوا يسقط النظام يسقط حسن الوضع بس هي غير منظمه وضاربين عليهم رصاص وبيرد عليهم.
Soon, it resembles an emergency room. Without mobile phones or the internet, they rely on rumors.
مفيش كنيسه اللي بيقولوا مفيش كنيسه ايوه ما حدش قاصد بس المكان مفتوح ما حدش حاسس بالوضع لا الحزب الوضع جوه السيده زينب مفيش حاجه الاسم ده مش اسم بابا يولع.
His followers they are being treated in Jesus Square, and some news about 4,000 soldiers from the army are in the street.
In the square, the crowds are growing and the tension is mounting. Back at the April 6th headquarters, they need to know what's going on. So someone buys a satellite dish and TV. That night, they watch the national headquarters of the ruling party burn. And then a pivotal moment. The army is now on the streets. The police have been completely withdrawn. The protesters are delighted. They're counting on the army to be on their side.
لازم نعمل مع الجيش يعني انت عشان لو سبته الجيش الشعب مع الجيش خلاص عشان الناس ما تخافش.
They head out into the night, determined to protect Tahrir Square and the safety of protesters sleeping there. And now they have gained the support of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's been less than a week since the first protests in the square. Despite the violence, hundreds of thousands came. As the world watched, the people continued to clamor for change. Ahmed Mar wants to make sure April 6th plays a role in that change. They hold a press conference. A reporter asks how long they intend to keep protesters in the square.
المظاهرين يفضلوا موجودين في ميدان التحرير لحد ما يتم تشكيل حكومه انقاذ وطني ملهاش اي علاقه بالسلطه الموجوده دلوقتي. المظاهرين لو مشوا من ميدان التحرير هيكون مخرج كبير جدا للنظام او لمبارك ان هو يعيد فرض سيطرته تاني.
Mar confirms that there will have to be some sort of alliance with the army.
بعض الضباط جوه الجيش ده الكلام ده كان يوم السبت اللي فات وعرضوا ان هم ممكن يساندونا ولكن القوى السياسيه عملت صوت سريعه بدأ ايمن نور ومعظم الشخصيات السياسيه ولكن فضلوا ان هو يكون الحديث مع القياده المركزيه للجيش مش مع احد الفروع في الجيش.
They watch as President Mubarak finally addresses the nation on state television. He was unwilling to relinquish power. The reaction is to take to the streets.
واخدين دكتوراه في العلم وادين دكتوراه بان احنا هنفضل في ميدان التحرير لغايه لما يمشي. مش هنمشي مش هنمشي هو هيمشي.
Not long after that, military police raided the April 6th headquarters. Pictures appeared on the internet of the trashed offices. Producer Elizabeth Jones was briefly detained, and the 15 activists who were there at the time were arrested and taken away. In the days that followed, we lost track of Ahmed Mar. He and April 6th were in the thick of it with the crowd. After 18 days, President Hosni Mubarak resigned. During the cleanup, we found Ahmed Mar surrounded by reporters.
I mean, what are the achievements and what more needs to be done now?
اهم حاجه ان الشعب صحي، دي اهم نقطه. لو كان حصل تغيير نخبوي والشعب لسه نايم ما كانش يبقى تغيير، لكن الشعب صحي وعرف حقه وعرف ازاي يطالب بحقه وعرف قوته. الشعب اقوى من الامن المركزي.
In the days that followed, new protests spread through the Middle East. In Yemen, Bahrain, in Jordan, Iraq, in Iran, and Libya.
Already, the activists in Egypt are reaching out to friends and peers in neighboring countries. The fact that the people have finally put their foot down and said, enough is enough. In Egypt, of all places over there, supposedly stable Egypt. This is a huge message for US policy and for residents of other parts of the region.
Okay, so you can kind of see here how the internet, particularly Facebook, was used to mobilize people and to galvanize support. And also, you can see here how the government was so threatened that they literally censored the internet and they took people's mobile phone access to the internet away. So it was just an example there of how powerful social media can be, kind of going back to Sherry Turkle's article, where she just talks about, again, yeah, the power of of technology and so forth. So any thoughts before we get into the little seagull a little bit? Okay, so the little seagull, there was just a few pages that I'm going to make you guys read for this week, but let's just kind of go through them a little bit. So, and then we'll do a little bit of some worksheets here. But with apostrophes, remember that apostrophes can be used for the possessive, and with the singular noun, you would always put the apostrophe before the S and after the noun. So in this case, the general's orders, or in this case, the school's vending machines. Now, this last one here, you see how it says Bill Gates's philanthropy? Well, technically, this is how you're supposed to do it. When a singular noun name ends with an S, you would still put an apostrophe S. However, your textbook talks about how a lot of people do it this way, and that's fine too. You would just put an apostrophe after the S. I mean, and also you'll see this in newspapers. That's the way they do it with AP style. But technically, you should still put an apostrophe S if it's a singular noun. That's the key here, it's a singular noun. Now with plural nouns, meaning that we're talking about not just one person, but multiple people, you would actually put the apostrophe or add the apostrophe in the S, except when the word already ends in S. So in this case, women doesn't end in S, so you would still put an apostrophe S there. Okay, now this next one, the James's house. Now in this case, we're referring to the James as a family. So in this case, since James, their family name ends in S, all you would need to do is put an apostrophe there. Now though, to give you an idea of how this might be different, if you were talking about one person, so we'll just use LeBron James, you would want to do it this way. Because it's a singular noun here, LeBron James, you would put an apostrophe S after that. But if it's plural, like a family named the James, we would just put the apostrophe after the S, and you would not put another S because that would indicate that you're talking about, that would be like one person. But since we're talking about multiple people here, you would put an apostrophe just after the S. Now with plural nouns, you never use an apostrophe at all. So you would say, she put her bag next to his. I mean, you wouldn't put an apostrophe here, his's, or like this, his. You just leave it alone. You just don't put an apostrophe. Now that's kind of an easy example. This is a common mistake though, where people would sometimes put an apostrophe there like this. His paper wasn't as thorough as hers. You don't need the apostrophe. You just leave that out. Okay, joint possession versus individual possession. Don't worry about the terminology here. Just look at the examples. Okay, so let's just say that there are two authors of a book down here. So it's one book, but there's two authors. This is what we call joint possession, where it's two people joined together, if that makes sense. In this case, you don't put an apostrophe after each person's name, just the second person's name in that example. And the same thing would go if you had three authors. If this was Carlson, Smith, and Rosemary, yeah, if there were three authors, it would be like this. So you only need an apostrophe S after the second noun here. Now with individual possession, that's where each individual that you're referring to has their own individual whatever. In this case, we're talking about heart transplants, because we're talking about Al's heart transplant here and Janice's heart transplant here. Obviously, they don't share the same heart. They each have their own individual hearts. Whereas up here, we're talking about this book that belongs to both Carlson and Rosemary. Because we're talking about individuals down here, Al has a heart and Janice has a heart. So in this case, we would put the apostrophe after each name. So Al's and Janice's heart transplants inspired me to become an organ donor. Okay, moving on here. Remember that we don't use contractions for MLA, but that being said, if you're writing paper for maybe a different class where it's okay, if anybody that's going into journalism, you would want to always use contractions. Actually, it's a lot different than MLA. But for MLA, we're going to avoid contractions. But that being said, if we were to use contractions, remember that you would put the apostrophe between the two words that would go here. So instead of saying I have worked too hard, you would say I've worked too hard. Remember that when we say she's with an apostrophe, we're talking about either she is or she has. Just like it's with an apostrophe, it always stands for it is or it has. You wouldn't have it in this example like she's gone to bed. It wouldn't really make sense. It would read like she's gone to bed. So you would put the apostrophe to indicate she has gone to bed. And of course, with this example, he could not leave fast enough here. So you would say he couldn't leave fast enough. Now with colons that your textbook talks about here, it's used to introduce something important or something significant. Sometimes this can be a list of things. So as an example of this, I'll just type in another, just something off the top of my head here. Let's just say that she went to the store to pick up 4 things. And we'll say carrots, lemons, onions, and soup, something like that. So it can be used to introduce a list or to maybe indicate that something important is part of the sentence. So in this case, not preparing for the test caused her to do poorly in the subject she had hated the most, history and math. So it's introducing history and math as the subjects that she hates the most. And that's how you would do that. Also, you can do this to indicate quotes. So if you're quoting somebody, now one thing I would say that usually you want to avoid something like this, according to Smith, and then you have the quote. I mean, you could do it that way, I mean, technically, and then you have the quote right there. But the best way to do that in that case would be according to Smith, comma there. But in this case, the third bullet point here, because we're talking about not just according to, but we're also indicating something that's important for maybe the previous sentence that would be up here or the previous paragraph. So if one author will just say Johnson says that this is true about maybe a book that lacked emotion, then you would have maybe another source that agreed with that. So you would say maybe Smith echoes that situation or that feeling. So that's how you can use colons. How about dashes? Dashes would be when you have 2 hyphen marks that are like on Microsoft Word, you put 2 hyphen marks there. And what it'll do is when you hit the space bar, it'll make it one long one. And dashes are similar to colons. They're used to emphasize something, but maybe slightly in a different way. I mean, in this example, after that, this is right from the textbook, by the way. I have the book right here, but I'm not going to look up the page. But after that, the roller coaster rises and falls, slowing down and speeding up, and then dash, all on its own. It's used to kind of emphasize this first part of the sentence. Okay. Also, colons can be, or I'm sorry, dashes can be used to separate things within a sentence. So it's kind of like taking a pause within the middle of a sentence. So it did not occur to him, possibly because he was from Orlando, that there are a lot of people who have never ridden a roller coaster. So, I mean, you could actually take this middle part out here with the dash. You could just say it did not occur to him that there are a lot of people who have never ridden a roller coaster, but this middle part here, a pause to maybe emphasize something. Again, up here to emphasize something. Okay, and parentheses used to enclose supplemental details. So it's kind of similar to this example. It's like a pause between the sentence, but this would be like, before participating in the medical study, Seema and Ratna, and then you could actually eliminate the parentheses here, knew nothing about the disease. But it would help the reader if you would say not the real names, of course, and probably the reader would guess that anyways, because these are not common names. And because it's a medical study, a lot of times in medical studies, they keep people's names anonymous. So they would give them pseudonyms. But you see how this is also indicated to the reader that there is something supplemental in here that maybe needs to be expressed. Okay, brackets. Okay, brackets could be used in a few different ways. The most common way is to clarify something in the quotation that you're citing. So in this case, she, Jane Smith, realizes that not everyone can be perfect. And so what that means is that this up here, this whole quotation, Jane Smith is not in this quotation. This would be like, according to, say, according to Johnson. And then what Johnson is saying here does not have Jane Smith in the quotation itself, but you're allowed to add to the quotation just for clarification purposes. Obviously, when you quote something, you want to use their exact words, but if there's something that you think needs to be clarified for the reader, it's okay to use brackets in here to make it clear to the reader that there's something here that they should understand. Okay, also, some of you may have came across this sick, S-I-C. This just means that there's something in the quotation that is incorrect, like a misspelling. And the point of this is that you don't want your reader to say that, hey, they misspelled want right here. And they said, I want to make you happy. By using this sick in brackets, it indicates to the reader that you're not making the quotation, but you are clarifying that this was not your mistake. Okay, and ellipses. This is used to indicate omission or pause within a quotation. There are other ways to use ellipses, by the way. I mean, let's just say you want, I mean, you can do this in a clever way if it's not annoying to your reader, but like, let's say that you want to end your essay with something. So you could say, I'm just being hypothetical here. So we will have to see where the future leads. And then in that case, it might be okay to use ellipses and end your essay like that. I mean, it's not really common, but it could be clever. I mean, you be the judge with that. And as you can see here, ellipses are just simply 3 periods separated by a space. But the most common ways that ellipses are used is that when you have a long quotation, or you have a quotation where there are things that are just not relevant in there, you're allowed to, as a writer, you are allowed to truncate that quote. You're allowed to shorten that quote with ellipses. That just indicates to the reader that there's a lot more in between the first part of the quotation, this part, and the second part of this quotation, this part, but that it might not be relevant, or maybe it goes on for a little too long. So you can just put ellipses to indicate to the reader that that's the case. And sometimes it really helps your writing because you don't want to have long quotations. For the most part, you don't want to have too long quotations anyways. So this will help your writing. And then the last thing is just hyphens. And these are usually used with compound adjectives. So like little known author or well-made film or things like that. Okay, just gonna, hold on, give me 1 second here. Just gonna switch rooms. We can look at some vocab exercises here coming up, but I just want to do a couple of activities with everyone. Not that one, not that one. Okay, yeah. Okay, this is just a conjunction exercise. So let's kind of go through these. For number 1, push the button blank, you want the elevator. What do you think should go there of the three choices there? Exactly, if. And how about this? The prostrate slaves didn't get up, blank, the king left. Yeah, exactly, Jose, until he was a proud man, blank, resisted his friend's offers of help. Yeah, exactly, who? It's actually who. Now, the difference between who and whom is very similar to the difference that we talked about last time with I and me. When you say I, that means you are the one doing the action. So you could say you and I are going to the store, and I would be used there because you are the one that's doing the action. So you wouldn't say you and me are going to the store. Same thing is true with who and whom. Who is the one that's doing the action, and whom is the one who is the, I guess, the action being done to them. So in this case, it's going to be who. Okay, how about this one? His rapacious ways made him wealthy, blank, friendless. Now this one's kind of a trick question because I could see this. Yeah, I think the answer is but I could see this as being and as well. But yeah, it's but. And then number 5, he rarely studied, blank, he passed every exam. Yeah, exactly, yet. And how about this one? The witness related, blank, he had seen. Yep, what? Number 7, it stormed, blank, hard that all the electricity went out. Yep, so. How about number 8 here? He is so tight-lipped that no one knew, blank, he enjoyed the party or not. Remember, look, kind of a trick question here because notice there are 2 answers here. So yeah, you could say whether, and you could also say if. And number 9, the best tactic is to confess, blank, ask her forgiveness. Yeah, and exactly. And then number 10, the child is unruly, blank, he has been spoiled. Yeah, because. Number 11, the 2 men look alike, blank, are related. Yep, but are related. Number 12, she didn't understand, blank, what was happening. Yeah, this one's pretty easy, yeah. Okay, one other thing that we'll do real quickly here is this one, common mistakes. Okay, so of the 3 here, which is the phrase that is not a word? Or I'm sorry, that's incorrect here. Which is the phrase or the word that is incorrect? Yeah, no, actually, Valerie, it's not this one. A lot means to like distribute. But it's yeah, it's actually this one right here. A lot of people use this one mistakenly when they're trying to use this one. When you say a lot, there's a space there. So it's a lot. How about this one? Which word means feeling great appreciation? This one's a little bit tricky, actually. Because a lot of people, yeah, no, Hunter, actually, this is a common mistake because even though it's tricky because you're feeling great about something, so a lot of people would put grateful, but it's actually this one. And if you're a fan of the Grateful Dead, you'll know that this is how they spell grateful in their name. So it's actually that one. Okay, this one's just a trick question. The answer is all of them. Okay. I consulted an attorney who or whom I met. Yeah, it's going to be who, because you are the one doing the action here. Who I met. Whoops, actually, wait, I'm sorry. Oh, shoot, let me go back real quick. Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. That was my mistake. Hold on here. And let me kind of explain why. So this one would be who resisted, right? And then, where were we here? Again, yeah, these can sometimes be tricky here. And seem to, well, that's all right. Let's do a few more here. And okay, so some of these activities, this is from English Grammar, and this is a pretty good site. We'll do some more exercises this semester. But before we wrap up here today, let's go through some vocab exercises here. And I mean, these are pretty simple for most of you, but what does petrified mean? Any guesses? Yeah, scared. So you could say that in fact, there's a great movie called The Petrified Forest, meaning that it's a scary forest. But yeah, you would say, oh my gosh, I'm petrified of my financial situation or something like that. So scared. How about foil? Foil just means to, I guess, hurt or destroy somebody's plans. So you could say that James Bond always foils the villains in James Bond, their evil plans, something like that. And then instigate, this one's pretty simple, but what does instigate mean? It just means to start or agitate. Yeah, exactly. And then last one here, adversary. Basically just means enemy, right? So two people that dislike each other. Yeah, opponent, exactly. They're adversaries, exactly. Okay, and I tell you what, and there are a few things that we'll do on Wednesday. I'm going to show you some things where we'll talk about that essay. And so that essay talks about algorithms. So we'll take a look at Google, what they say. And I really want to get your take on this because Google, they say that they try to be as fair as possible, but they're really not transparent into how they use algorithms. So we'll look at that. Also, I wanted to show you one other thing here. This one, because this has come up lately too, especially with big tech, and they're silencing or censoring a lot of information. And sometimes there are things that need to be censored. I mean, you know what? Probably later this semester, we'll talk about censorship. And the First Amendment does protect free speech, but it doesn't protect obscenity. So we'll get into the definitions of each of that, because there's also, the Supreme Court has defined profanity, indecency, and obscenity. And profanity and indecency are protected by the First Amendment, but obscenity is not. So we want freedom of speech, but sometimes not all speech. But this is kind of interesting because this just is from last month. You'll see here, this is from Wired magazine, and YouTube is now silencing or censoring some information. Again, sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you can have obscene things out there that need to be censored. But a lot of times people say that these big tech companies are going a little bit too far with censorship. So I want to show you this article, and we'll talk about things that are happening recently in the last year in terms of censorship and what Google is doing with their algorithms. And like I said, they're not very transparent, and neither is Facebook. And you guys might know, like I said at the beginning, that some of these big tech people have to go in front of Congress on Friday. So we'll see how that goes. And obviously it's only Monday, so it's not like you've had a chance to read it yet, but we'll kind of take a look at that. And then we will have a bonus session on Friday. I will tell you that for this Friday, we're going to finish up the what we were talking about last time with the Cialdini. I'm thinking though that for some of the bonus stuff that I had planned in the future, we might actually talk more about that in class. So I'll keep you posted. And what was that? Oh, I was also going to tell you too that I was saying that we were going to be talking about Malcolm Gladwell next. I might save that for future weeks, and we might get into another fun lecture for Wednesday too, of course. But we'll start with talking about the essay for this week. Okay, so before I wrap up here, anybody have any questions here? Okay, great. And remember, this will be on YouTube later. I'm gonna start recording it immediately right after this, or I'm gonna save the recording right after this. It's being saved right now, but I'm gonna post it on YouTube. So this will be available later. And thanks everybody for attending, and we will see you guys on Wednesday.